The frost had claimed her just as surely as the grave had claimed him, and Eleanor Sterling stood motionless in the December wind, her thin black dress no match for the mountain cold that swept through the cemetery outside Animas Forks, Colorado, in the winter of 1882. She had been standing there since dawn, they said, though no one had bothered to come for her until the sun began its descent behind the San Juan Mountains. The other mourners had departed hours ago, their sympathetic words still ringing hollow in her ears. Her husband Thomas had been in the ground for 3 days now, and Eleanor had visited his grave each morning since, but today something had broken inside her. She could not make her feet move, could not make herself turn away from the wooden cross that marked where they had laid him to rest. The wind cut through her dress like 1,000 tiny knives, but she barely felt it anymore. Her hands were white, her lips blue, and her whole body had begun to shake with tremors she could not control. 22 years old and already a widow. The word tasted bitter in her mouth. She had been married less than 2 years, and now Thomas was gone, taken by a mine collapse that had also claimed 4 other men from their small mining town. She heard boots crunching in the snow behind her but did not turn. Let them come. Let them say their piece and leave her be. She had nowhere to go anyway. The small cabin she had shared with Thomas belonged to the mining company, and they would need it for the next worker. Her parents were dead, buried back in Missouri. Her sister had married and moved to California. Eleanor was alone in the world, and standing here at this grave seemed as good a place as any to let the cold take her to. "Madam." The voice was deep, rough with disuse, but not unkind. "You need to come in from the cold." Eleanor did not respond. Her jaw was too stiff to form words even if she had wanted to. She felt something warm and heavy settle over her shoulders, and suddenly the wind was not cutting through her quite so viciously. A coat. Someone had placed their coat around her. The fabric smelled of leather and wood smoke and something else, something masculine and alive that seemed foreign to her now. "Come home," the voice whispered close to her ear, and then strong arms were lifting her, pulling her away from the grave even as she tried to resist. "No," she managed to croak, the words scraping out of her frozen throat. "Let me stay." "Not a chance, madam. I did not ride all the way up here to watch a woman freeze to death in a cemetery." Eleanor found herself pressed against a broad chest, her face buried in a wool shirt that retained the warmth of the man carrying her. She tried to struggle, but her limbs would not obey her. The cold had sapped all her strength, and now that someone else had taken control, her body seemed content to simply surrender. She felt herself being lifted onto a horse, and then the man climbed up behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her waist to keep her in the saddle. He pulled his coat more tightly around her shoulders and urged the horse forward. "My name is Caleb Xavier," he said as they rode down the mountain trail toward town. "I work for the mining company. They sent me to fetch you." Of course they had. The mining company owned everything in Animas Forks, including apparently the right to decide when a widow had mourned long enough. "I do not need fetching," Eleanor said, though her words lacked conviction. She could feel warmth beginning to return to her extremities, a painful tingling that brought tears to her eyes. "Maybe not," Caleb agreed, his voice rumbling through his chest and into her back where she leaned against him. "But I am fetching you anyway." They rode in silence for a while. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried not to think about anything at all. She did not want to think about Thomas, cold in the ground. She did not want to think about the empty cabin or the uncertain future that stretched before her. She did not want to think about this stranger whose arms held her with surprising gentleness. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked as they entered the town proper. Anima's Forks was little more than a collection of ramshackle buildings clinging to the mountainside, housing perhaps 200 souls who had come seeking silver and found mostly hardship. "My place," Caleb said. "It is warm and there is food. You can stay there until we figure out what is to be done." "I cannot stay with a stranger," Eleanor protested weakly. "It is not proper." "Proper went out the window when you decided to freeze yourself to death," Caleb said bluntly. "Besides, Mrs. Chen, who runs the boarding house, is full up with minors. There is nowhere else." Eleanor did not have the energy to argue further. She let herself be carried into a small cabin on the edge of town, where Caleb finally set her down in a chair near a pot-bellied stove that radiated blessed heat. "Stay there," he ordered, and Eleanor was too exhausted to do anything but obey. She watched through half-closed eyes as Caleb moved around the cabin with efficient movements. He stoked the fire in the stove, put a kettle on to boil, and retrieved a thick quilt from a trunk in the corner. He wrapped the quilt around her over his coat and then knelt before her, taking her frozen hands in his much larger ones. "This is going to hurt," he warned, and then he began to rub her hands gently, trying to restore circulation. He was right. It did hurt. The pain was excruciating as feeling returned to her fingers, and Eleanor bit her lip to keep from crying out. Tears streamed down her face anyway, though she could not have said if they were from physical pain or something deeper. "I know," Caleb murmured, his hands never stopping their gentle massage. "I know it hurts, but you will be all right. You will make it through this." Eleanor looked at him properly for the first time. He was older than her, perhaps 30, with dark hair that needed cutting and dark eyes that held both kindness and a deep sadness she recognized. His face was weathered from years in the sun and wind, with strong features that might have been handsome if not for a long scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw. "Why do you care?" she asked. "You do not know me." Something flickered in his eyes. "I know what it is like to lose someone," he said quietly. "I know what it is like to stand at a grave and wish the ground would swallow you up too." "Who did you lose?" He did not answer immediately, focusing instead on her hands. Finally he said, "My wife and daughter, 5 years ago. Influenza took them both within a week of each other." Eleanor felt her breath catch. "I am sorry." "So am I," Caleb said, "but I learned something in those 5 years. The dead do not want us to follow them. They want us to live. They want us to go on." "I do not know how," Eleanor whispered. "One breath at a time," Caleb said. "One moment at a time. And right now, this moment, you are going to drink some hot tea and eat some food and get warm. That is all you need to worry about." He released her hands and stood, moving to pour hot water into a cup. He added tea leaves and a generous spoonful of honey, then pressed the cup into her hands. Eleanor sipped the tea gratefully, feeling its warmth spread through her chest. Caleb disappeared into what must have been a small bedroom and returned with wool socks and a flannel shirt. "Your dress is damp from the snow," he said, setting the clothes on the chair beside her. "You need to change. I will wait outside." He left before Eleanor could protest, closing the door behind him. She sat there for a moment, then slowly stood and changed out of her wet dress with fumbling fingers. The flannel shirt hung nearly to her knees, and the wool socks were comically large, but they were warm and dry. She wrapped the quilt back around herself and called for Caleb. He entered, stamping snow from his boots. His eyes went to her briefly, then away, as if he was being careful not to look at her too directly. "Better." "Yes," Eleanor admitted. "Thank you." Caleb nodded and began preparing food. Eleanor watched him move around the small kitchen area. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own body. There was something calming about his presence, something solid and dependable. He set a plate of beans and cornbread before her, along with some bacon that looked crispy and delicious. Eleanor had not eaten all day, she realized, and she found herself suddenly ravenous. She ate quickly, barely tasting the food, just knowing that her body needed it. Caleb ate his own meal standing up, leaning against the counter. When she finished, he took her plate and washed it in a basin. "You can take the bed," he said. "I will sleep out here by the stove." "I cannot take your bed," Eleanor protested. "Yes, you can. You need to sleep and sleep warm. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." Eleanor was too tired to argue. She let him guide her to the small bedroom where a narrow bed was covered with more quilts. She climbed in fully clothed and was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. She woke once in the night, disoriented and gasping from a nightmare she could not remember. The cabin was dark except for the faint glow of the stove in the main room. She heard movement, and then Caleb appeared in the doorway. "You all right?" he asked quietly. Eleanor nodded, though her heart was still racing. Caleb hesitated, then moved to sit on the edge of the bed. He did not touch her, just sat there in the darkness. "The nightmares will pass," he said. "It takes time, but they will pass." "Does the pain pass too?" Eleanor whispered. "No," Caleb said honestly, "but it changes. It becomes something you can carry instead of something that crushes you." They sat in silence for a while. Eleanor found his presence comforting, this stranger who understood her grief in a way no one else could. "Tell me about them," she said. "Your wife and daughter." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Her name was Mary. She had red hair and freckles and the worst singing voice you ever heard, but she sang anyway because it made her happy. Our daughter was named Grace. She was 4 years old when she died. She loved flowers and horses, and she was afraid of chickens." Eleanor felt tears sliding down her face. "They sound wonderful." They were. Mary was a school teacher before we married. She taught Grace her letters. Grace could write her name. His voice cracked. She was so proud of that. "Tell me about Thomas," Caleb said after a moment. Eleanor took a shaky breath. "He was kind. That is what I remember most about him. He was gentle and kind, and he never raised his voice. He came from Ohio following the Silver Rush. We met at a church social. He was shy, stumbled over his words when he asked if he could court me. I thought it was sweet." "How long were you married?" "Not quite 2 years. We were going to move to Denver in the spring. Thomas wanted to save enough money to buy a farm. He did not like the mines, but the pay was good." "I am sorry you lost him," Caleb said. "I am sorry you lost them," Eleanor replied. They sat together in the darkness, two wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in shared grief. Finally, Caleb stood. "Try to sleep," he said. "I will be right outside if you need anything." Eleanor lay back down and closed her eyes. This time she slept without nightmares. Morning came cold and bright. Eleanor woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. She lay still for a moment, remembering where she was, in a stranger's cabin, in a stranger's bed, wearing a stranger's clothes. The impropriety of it should have scandalized her, but she found she did not care. What did propriety matter when your whole life had been torn apart? She rose and padded into the main room. Caleb stood at the stove, his back to her. He had already dressed for the day in worn trousers and a clean work shirt. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Coffee is ready." Eleanor poured herself a cup and sat at the small table. Caleb brought over 2 plates of eggs and bacon and sat across from her. They ate in companionable silence. Eleanor found herself stealing glances at him, trying to puzzle out this man who had carried her home from a graveyard and offered her shelter without asking for anything in return. "What happens now?" she finally asked. Caleb set down his fork. "That depends on what you want. Do you have anywhere to go? Any family?" Eleanor shook her head. My sister is in California, but I have not heard from her in over a year. I do not even know if she still lives at the same address. Do you want to try to reach her, did she? Eleanor honestly did not know. She and her sister had never been close. I do not think so, she said. Not yet anyway, Caleb nodded. Then you need to stay here at least for a while. You need time to heal, to figure out what you want to do next. I cannot impose on you like that, Eleanor said. You are not imposing, I offered. But people will talk. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. Let them talk, Caleb said with a shrug. This is a mining town. We have bigger scandals every week. Besides, most folks know I am not a threat. I have kept to myself since Mary died. Eleanor studied him. Why are you helping me? Caleb met her gaze steadily. Because when Mary and Grace died, I was exactly where you were yesterday. I stood at their graves and I wanted to die too. A man named Samuel Johnson, a preacher passing through town, he dragged me away. He made me eat and sleep, and he stayed with me for 2 weeks until I could function again. He told me that someday I would have the chance to do the same for someone else, and when that day came, I should take it. So you are repaying a debt, Eleanor said, trying to ignore the small pang of disappointment in her chest. Maybe, Caleb said. Or maybe I just do not want to watch another person destroy themselves with grief when I know there is another way through. Eleanor looked down at her coffee. I do not know if I can survive this. You can, Caleb said with certainty. I know you can. You just need time and a safe place to land. And you are offering that, I am. Eleanor took a deep breath. What choice did she have, really? She could accept Caleb's help, or she could end up back at that graveyard, letting the cold finish what it had started. When she put it that way, the choice was clear. Thank you, she said quietly. I accept, but I will not be a burden. I can cook and clean. I can earn my keep. Something like approval flickered in Caleb's eyes. Fair enough. Though you do not need to start today. Today you rest. But Eleanor found she did not want to rest. Rest meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant pain. So instead she asked Caleb if he had anything she could mend. He produced a pile of shirts and trousers with torn seams and missing buttons, and Eleanor spent the day sewing by the window, grateful for work to occupy her hands and mind. Caleb left for a few hours to work his claim. He was an independent prospector, he explained, not employed by the mining company. He had a small claim up in the mountains that produced just enough silver to keep him going. When he returned that evening, the cabin was clean, his mending was done, and Eleanor had managed to produce a passable stew from the supplies in his larder. They ate together, and afterward, Caleb taught her how to play checkers. It was such a normal, mundane activity that Eleanor almost forgot to be sad. Almost. That night, she woke again from nightmares, and again, Caleb came to sit with her in the darkness. He did not try to tell her everything would be all right. He did not offer empty platitudes. He just sat with her, a quiet presence in the dark, until she could breathe normally again. It became their routine. Days passed, then weeks. Eleanor cooked and cleaned and mended. Caleb worked his claim and brought home supplies. In the evenings, they would sit by the stove, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Caleb had a small collection of books, and Eleanor discovered she could lose herself in stories for hours at a time. The nightmares continued, but they came less frequently. And always, when she woke gasping and afraid, Caleb would appear in the doorway, ready to sit with her until the fear passed. Slowly, painfully, Eleanor began to heal. The sharp edge of her grief dulled to a persistent ache. She found she could go hours without thinking of Thomas, and when she did think of him, the memories no longer threatened to drown her. She also found herself increasingly aware of Caleb. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the rare rumble of his laugh, the gentle strength in his hands. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, as if he was trying to memorize her face. It confused her, these feelings. She was a widow. She should be mourning. But somehow, here in this small cabin with this quiet, kind man, she felt more alive than she had in months. One evening in late January, a blizzard swept through Anima's Forks. The wind howled around the cabin and snow piled high against the door. Caleb secured the animals in their small barn and made sure they had plenty of firewood stacked inside. They were trapped indoors for 3 days. At first, Eleanor worried it would be awkward, the two of them confined in such close quarters. But instead, she found she enjoyed it. They talked more than they ever had before. Caleb told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ranch before the silver rush lured him north. Eleanor told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her father's farm and her mother's garden. On the second night of the storm, Caleb asked about her marriage. "Was it happy?" he said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "I am sorry. That is too personal a question." "No, it is all right," Eleanor said. She had been thinking about it lately, examining her memories of Thomas with new eyes. "It was comfortable," she said finally. "Thomas was a good man. He treated me well, but I am not sure it was ever truly passionate, if that makes sense." "It does," Caleb said quietly. "What about you and Mary?" A smile crossed Caleb's face, sad but genuine. "Mary was my best friend. We grew up together. I think I loved her before I even knew what love was. Ours was a happy marriage. You must miss her terribly." "I do," Caleb said, "but I have learned to be grateful for the time we had instead of angry about the time we lost." Eleanor thought about that. Could she be grateful for her 2 years with Thomas? Could she remember him with joy instead of just pain? "I think I am beginning to understand that," she said. Caleb looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Eleanor's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might reach for her. Instead, he stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses," he said, and disappeared into the storm before Eleanor could respond. When he returned, half frozen and covered in snow, the moment had passed. But Eleanor lay awake that night, thinking about the look in his eyes and the strange fluttering in her chest. By early February, Eleanor had been living with Caleb for nearly 2 months. The scandal she had worried about never materialized. The people of Anima's Forks had bigger concerns than an unconventional living arrangement. The mining company had announced layoffs. The silver was running out, they said, and soon the town might be abandoned altogether. Caleb's independent claim was still producing, but even he admitted it would not last much longer. "What will you do when the silver runs out?" Eleanor asked him one evening. Caleb shrugged. "Move on, I suppose. Maybe go back to Texas. I still have family there." The thought of Caleb leaving sent an unexpected bolt of panic through Eleanor's chest. When had he become so essential to her life? When had she started thinking of this cabin as home? "What about you?" Caleb asked. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" Eleanor had been thinking about it. She had some money saved, and Thomas's death benefit from the mining company. It was not much, but it was enough to start fresh somewhere. She could go to California, try to find her sister. She could go back to Missouri. She could go anywhere, really. But she did not want to go anywhere. She wanted to stay right here in this drafty cabin with this quiet man who had saved her life. The realization shocked her. It was too soon. Thomas had only been dead for months. What kind of woman fell for another man so quickly? But even as she thought it, Eleanor knew it was not that simple. Her feelings for Caleb were nothing like what she had felt for Thomas. Thomas had been safe, comfortable. Caleb made her heart race. Caleb made her feel things she had never felt before, intense and frightening and wonderful all at once. "I do not know," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "I suppose it depends on many things," Caleb nodded slowly. Well, you have time to figure it out. No need to rush into any decisions. But Eleanor was not so sure. Time felt suddenly precious, slipping away like water through her fingers. That night she woke from a nightmare as usual, but this time when Caleb came to sit with her, she reached for his hand. He froze, and Eleanor almost pulled away. But then his fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for giving me a place to heal." "You do not need to thank me," Caleb said, his voice rough. "Yes, I do. I was ready to die, Caleb. I wanted to die. And you would not let me. You gave me a reason to keep breathing." She felt rather than saw him turn toward her in the darkness. His free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Eleanor," he said, and there was a world of longing in her name. "Is this wrong?" she whispered. "Is it wrong that I feel this way, that when I think about you leaving I cannot breathe?" "I do not know," Caleb admitted. "All I know is that somewhere in the last 2 months, you became the reason I look forward to coming home at night. You became the person I think about when I wake up in the morning, and if that is wrong, then I do not want to be right." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What do we do?" "I do not know that either," Caleb said, "but I think maybe we stop fighting it, stop pretending we do not feel what we feel." And then he was kissing her, gentle at first, then deeper as Eleanor pressed closer. It was nothing like kissing Thomas had been. This was fire and want and need. This was everything she had not known she was missing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "I want you to be sure," he said. "I do not want you to do anything you are not ready for." "I am sure," Eleanor said, and she was. Whatever this was between them, it was real and right and true. It might be too soon by society's standards, but Eleanor was done living by society's rules. Thomas was gone, and she was still alive, and she wanted to embrace that life with both hands. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Not out there by the stove. Here." Caleb kissed her again in answer, and this time he did not leave. They lay together in the narrow bed, fully clothed, Eleanor's head on his chest and his arms wrapped around her. It was innocent and intimate all at once, and Eleanor felt a peace she had not known in months. "I love you," Caleb whispered into her hair. "I know it is too soon to say it, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you, Eleanor Sterling." Eleanor tilted her head up to look at him, even though she could barely see his face in the darkness. "I love you too," she said, and knew it was true. "I think I have loved you since you wrapped your coat around me and told me to come home." They talked through the night, making whispered plans for a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. When Caleb's claim ran dry, they would leave Anima's forks together. Maybe they would go to Denver. Maybe Texas. It did not matter where as long as they were together. As dawn broke, Caleb finally spoke the question that had been hanging between them. "Will you marry me, Eleanor? I know we should wait longer, be proper about it, but I do not want to wait. I have already lost too much time to grief. I do not want to lose any more." "Yes," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They married a week later in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit judge who passed through Anima's forks. Mrs. Chen stood as witness, along with a few of the miners who knew Caleb. It was nothing like Eleanor's first wedding, which had been a large affair in the church with half the town attending. This was simple and quiet and perfect. That night, in the cabin that was now truly their home, Caleb carried Eleanor over the threshold, and they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. This was what marriage was supposed to be, she realized. This connection, this intimacy, this feeling of two souls becoming one. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Caleb traced patterns on her shoulder. "No regrets?" he asked softly. "None," Eleanor said firmly. You, not a single one. They stayed in Anima's Forks through the spring, working Caleb's claim until it finally gave out in late April. By then, most of the town had already emptied out. The mining company had shut down operations, and people had scattered to other boomtowns, chasing the next silver strike. Caleb and Eleanor loaded their possessions into a wagon and headed east toward Denver. They had both agreed they were done with mining towns, done with the boom and bust cycle. Caleb wanted to ranch again, and Eleanor wanted a place where she could put down roots and build a real home. They found what they were looking for in a small town called Pleasant Valley, about 50 miles northeast of Denver. It was farming country, not mining, and the land was affordable. Caleb bought 80 acres with a small house and a barn that needed repairs. It was not much, but it was theirs. That first year was hard work. They planted crops and fixed fences and turned the rundown house into a real home. Eleanor planted a garden, remembering everything her mother had taught her. Caleb bought a few head of cattle and some chickens. Their neighbors were kind, accepting them without question. If anyone thought it was odd that Eleanor had remarried so quickly after her first husband's death, they were polite enough not to say so. By the time winter came again, Eleanor was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to tell Caleb until she was certain. When she finally shared the news, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." That night, as they lay in bed, Caleb's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, Eleanor thought about how much had changed in a single year. Last December, she had been standing at a grave, ready to let the cold claim her. Now she was warm and safe and loved, with a husband she adored and a baby on the way. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About how you saved my life," Eleanor said. "About how I never believed I could be this happy again." "I did not save your life," Caleb said. "I just gave you a reason to save yourself." "You gave me everything," Eleanor insisted. "You gave me love and hope and a future I can look forward to." "You gave me those things too," Caleb said. "After Mary and Grace died, I was just going through the motions. I was alive but not really living. You changed that. You made me want to live again." They fell asleep holding each other, dreaming of the future they would build together. Their son was born in late July, a hot summer day that had Eleanor sweating and cursing through 12 hours of labor. But when the midwife finally placed the baby in her arms, all the pain was forgotten. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same brown as Caleb's. They named him Thomas Caleb Xavier, honoring both the past and the present. Caleb held his son with tears streaming down his face, and Eleanor knew he was thinking of Grace, the daughter he had lost. But there was no sadness in his tears, only joy. "He is beautiful," Caleb whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Eleanor said, watching her husband cradle their newborn son. Her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Tommy, as they called him, was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. He loved being outside, and Caleb would carry him around the farm, showing him the cattle and the chickens and telling him about everything they would do together when he was older. When Tommy was 6 months old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born on a crisp October morning. They named her Grace Eleanor Xavier, and Caleb wept openly when he held her for the first time. "Thank you," he whispered to Eleanor. "Thank you for giving me this family. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for finding me," Eleanor said. "Thank you for not letting me give up." The years passed quickly after that. Tommy grew into a serious little boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Grace was his opposite, full of laughter and mischief, always getting into something she should not. They were joined by two more children, another boy named Samuel after the preacher who had helped Caleb, and finally another girl, Julia. The ranch prospered. Caleb proved to be as good with cattle as he had been with mining, and Eleanor's garden produced more vegetables than they could eat. They sold the surplus in town and saved their money carefully. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb took Eleanor into Denver for the weekend. They stayed in a hotel and ate in restaurants and walked through the city like they were courting again. It was the first time they had been away from the children, and while they missed them terribly, it was also wonderful to have time just for each other. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked as they sat in their hotel room on their last evening. "Marrying me so quickly, not taking more time to grieve Thomas properly." Eleanor took his hand. They had talked about this before over the years, but she knew Caleb still worried sometimes that he had rushed her into something she was not ready for. "Never," she said firmly. "Not once. I love Thomas in the way you love a good friend, but what we have, Caleb, this is different. This is the kind of love people write songs about. I grieved for Thomas and I honor his memory. But you are my husband, my partner, my love. You are the father of my children and the keeper of my heart. I regret nothing." Caleb pulled her close and kissed her deeply. "I love you, Eleanor Xavier. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered against his lips. "My cowboy who saved me from the cold and brought me home." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion that had never faded between them. And the next morning they returned to their farm and their children, to the life they had built together from the ashes of their individual griefs. More years passed. Tommy grew tall and strong like his father, and eventually married a girl from town named Rebecca. They built a house on the far side of the property and worked the ranch with Caleb. Grace became a teacher, just like Caleb's first wife had been, and married a banker from Denver. Samuel went to university and became a lawyer. Julia, the baby, stayed close to home, marrying a neighboring rancher's son. Eleanor and Caleb grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces wrinkling, but their love never diminishing. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands like young lovers. Sometimes Eleanor would think back to that December day in the graveyard, to the woman she had been then, frozen and hopeless and ready to die. It felt like another lifetime, another person entirely. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb would ask, because even after all these years, he could always tell when her mind had wandered. "About the day you found me," Eleanor would say. "About how lucky I am that you refused to let me give up." "I am the lucky one," Caleb would insist. "You gave me a reason to live again. You gave me a family and a home and more happiness than I thought possible." "We gave those things to each other," Eleanor would correct him, and he would smile and kiss her hand, and they would sit in comfortable silence, grateful for every moment they had together. When they celebrated their 30th anniversary, all 4 of their children came home for the celebration, bringing grandchildren that now numbered 8. The house was full of noise and laughter, and Eleanor stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, watching through the window as Caleb played with the grandchildren in the yard. She thought about the 2 graves she had visited over the years. Thomas's grave in Anima's Forks, though the town was long abandoned now, and Grace's grave and Mary's in Texas. They had made the journey south 5 years after they married, so Caleb could introduce Eleanor to his family and visit the cemetery. Eleanor had placed flowers on those graves and said a prayer, thanking Thomas for his kindness, thanking Mary and Grace for loving Caleb first, for shaping him into the man he had become. There was no jealousy in her heart, only gratitude. Their losses had made them who they were, and those losses had ultimately led them to each other. "Mother, do you need help?" Grace asked, coming into the kitchen. Eleanor smiled at her daughter, who looked so much like Caleb it made her heart ache. "No, darling, I am just wool gathering." "Thinking about the old days?" Grace asked knowingly. "Always," Eleanor admitted. "Is it foolish that after 30 years I am still amazed by my own happiness?" "Not foolish at all," Grace said, hugging her mother. "You and Father have the kind of love most people only dream about. We all hope to be as happy as you are." That night, after the children and grandchildren had gone to bed in various rooms throughout the house, Eleanor and Caleb slipped outside to sit on the porch, just the two of them. 30 years, Caleb mused. Where did the time go? "Into building this life," Eleanor said, gesturing at the house, the barn, the land stretching out before them. "Into raising our children, into loving each other." "I would not change a single moment," Caleb said. "Neither would I," Eleanor agreed. "Well, maybe I would change that time Tommy fell out of the hayloft and broke his arm. That was terrifying." Caleb laughed. "Or when Grace decided to cut her own hair and ended up looking like a sheep that had been attacked by wolves." They reminisced for hours, talking about all the moments that had made up their life together. The good times and the hard times, the laughter and the tears, the ordinary moments that were extraordinary simply because they had shared them. As the moon rose high in the sky, Caleb stood and offered Eleanor his hand. "Dance with me." There was no music, but Eleanor took his hand anyway. They swayed together on the porch, moving to a rhythm only they could hear. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day?" Caleb asked softly. "At the graveyard, 'Come home,'" Eleanor recited. "You wrapped your coat around me and said, 'Come home.'" "I did not know then that you would become my home," Caleb said. "That wherever you are is where I belong." "You are my home too," Eleanor whispered. "You have been since the moment you refused to leave me in the cold." They continued to dance. Two souls who had found each other in the darkness and built a lifetime of light together. More years passed. They celebrated their 40th anniversary and then their 50th. Their children gave them a party with the whole town invited. Eleanor, now 72, and Caleb, now 80, sat in places of honor while people toasted their long and happy marriage. 50 years, the mayor said in his speech. 50 years of love and partnership. The Xaviers are an inspiration to us all, proof that true love not only exists but endures. Eleanor caught Caleb's eye across the room and smiled. If only they knew the whole story. If only they knew it had started with grief and cold and a cowboy who refused to let a widow freeze to death. But perhaps that was the point. The best love stories often started in the darkest places. It was the climbing out together that made them beautiful. As their health began to fail, as it inevitably must, Eleanor and Caleb faced it the way they had faced everything else, together. When Caleb's heart grew weak, Eleanor was by his side. When Eleanor's joints ached with arthritis, Caleb was there to help her. They moved slower now, their bodies betraying them even as their love remained strong. But they did not complain. They had been given 55 years together, and that was more than many people got. One evening, when Eleanor was 77 and Caleb was 85, they sat on their porch as the sun set, as they had done countless times before. Caleb's breathing was labored, his heart struggling. Eleanor held his hand, her own strength fading but her grip still firm. "I am glad I found you that day," Caleb said quietly. "I am glad I did not leave you there." "So am I," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. "I would have missed out on the best 55 years of my life." "No regrets?" Caleb asked, echoing the question he had asked on their wedding night so long ago. "Not a single one," Eleanor said firmly. "You gave me everything, Caleb Xavier. You gave me life and love and a family and a home. You gave me reasons to wake up every morning with joy in my heart. How could I possibly have regrets? Caleb smiled, that same gentle smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. I love you, Eleanor. I will always love you. I love you too, Eleanor said, in this life and the next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Caleb took his last breath with Eleanor's hand in his. He went peacefully, surrounded by love, the way everyone should go. Eleanor sat with him for a long time, her hand still holding his, tears streaming down her face. But these were not the desperate, hopeless tears of that girl in the graveyard. These were tears of gratitude and love and a grief that came from having been blessed beyond measure. Their children came when she called them. They mourned together, but they also celebrated a life well lived and a love that had been extraordinary. They buried Caleb on the ranch, in a spot he had picked out years before, under an old cottonwood tree that overlooked the mountains. Eleanor stood at his grave, but this time she was not frozen. This time she was surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them testament to the life she and Caleb had built together. Thank you, she whispered to the grave. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for bringing me home. Thank you for 55 years of love. She placed a single red rose on the grave, then turned and walked back toward the house. She was not running from grief this time. She was walking toward the family and the life that she and Caleb had created together. Eleanor lived another 2 years after Caleb's death. She spent them surrounded by family, telling stories about their grandfather to the great-grandchildren who had never known him. She told them about the graveyard in Anima's Forks, about the cowboy who had wrapped his coat around a frozen widow and whispered, "Come home." She told them about building the ranch, about the hard times and the good times, about a love that had lasted over half a century. When her time came, Eleanor went peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. Her children buried her next to Caleb under the cottonwood tree. On her headstone, they carved the words, "She came home and found love." And if sometimes, in the evenings when the sun sets just right, people say they can see 2 figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the mountains, well, that is just the way of things. Some loves are too strong to be contained by death. Some loves echo through eternity. The ranch stayed in the family for generations. The story of Eleanor and Caleb became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. But at its heart, it was always a simple story. A story of 2 broken people who found each other in the darkness and chose to build a life together in the light. It was a story of hope and healing and second chances. A story of a widow frozen at a grave in December, and a cowboy who wrapped his coat around her and whispered, "Come home." A story of a woman who found the courage to live again, and a man who gave her a reason to do so. And in the end, it was a love story. The kind of love story that reminds us that even in our darkest moments, even when we think we cannot go on, love can find us. Love can save us. Love can bring us home. The legacy they left was not just in the land or the house, or even the family they built. Their legacy was in the proof that love could triumph over grief, that happiness could follow sorrow, that life could begin again even after everything seemed lost. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century. The old house was preserved by the family, turned into a sort of museum to Eleanor and Caleb's memory. Visitors came from all over to hear their story, to stand on the porch where they had spent so many evenings, to feel the echo of a love that had endured. And on cold December nights, when the wind howled down from the mountains and snow covered the ground, people swore they could hear a voice on the wind, deep and gentle, saying the words that had started it all. "Come home." because that was what Caleb had given Eleanor that day in the graveyard. Not just shelter from the cold, not just a roof over her head, but a home. A place where she was loved and valued and cherished. A place where she could heal and grow and become the person she was always meant to be. And that was what Eleanor had given Caleb in return. She had taken a man who was merely existing and given him a reason to truly live. She had filled his house with laughter and love and turned it back into a home. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that transcended their individual lives and became a testament to the power of love itself. The town of Pleasant Valley grew and changed over the years, but the Xavier Ranch remained, a constant presence, a reminder of what love and hard work and dedication could build. The descendants of Eleanor and Caleb became teachers and doctors and ranchers and artists, but they all carried the story with them, this tale of a widow and a cowboy, and a love that defied all odds. And sometimes, on particularly cold December nights, the descendants would gather at the old house, and the eldest would tell the story one more time. They would speak of Anima's forks, of a graveyard in the snow, of a woman who had given up on life. They would speak of a cowboy with kind eyes and a gentle touch, who had refused to let that woman surrender to the cold. They would speak of a coat wrapped around shaking shoulders, of strong arms lifting a frozen woman onto a horse, of a whisper that changed two lives forever. Come home. And the children would listen, wide-eyed, as they heard about the love that bloomed in that small cabin, about the wedding and the ranch and the family that followed. They would hear about 55 years of partnership, of facing life's challenges hand in hand, of a love that never wavered or dimmed. They would learn about grief and healing, about second chances and new beginnings. They would learn that it was possible to honor the past while embracing the future, to remember those we have lost while still opening our hearts to new love. And when the story ended, as it always did, with Eleanor joining Caleb under the cottonwood tree, there would be tears, yes, but also smiles. Because it was not a sad ending. It was a perfect ending. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a beautiful life together, and who rested now side by side, their love eternal. The youngest children would ask questions. Was it really that cold? Did she really almost freeze? Did he really save her? And the answer was always yes. Yes to all of it. Because it was not just a story, it was history, it was real. It was the foundation upon which everything they knew and loved had been built. As the night grew late and the children were tucked into bed, the adults would linger by the fire, nursing cups of coffee or cocoa, thinking about Eleanor and Caleb, thinking about the courage it took to love again after loss, thinking about the kindness of a man who saw a stranger in need and did not look away, and they would feel grateful. Grateful for the example that had been set, for the legacy that had been left, for the reminder that love was always worth the risk. Outside, the snow would fall softly, covering the ground in a blanket of white. The old cottonwood tree stood sentinel over two graves, its bare branches reaching toward the stars. And if you listened very carefully, you might hear it. A woman's laugh, a man's low chuckle, the sound of two people who had found their way home to each other and never let go. Because that was the truth at the heart of the story. Love was home. Love was the place where you were safe and known and cherished. Love was what made life worth living, what gave meaning to all the struggles and sorrows. Eleanor had been lost, frozen at a grave, ready to surrender to the cold and the grief. But Caleb had found her. He had wrapped his coat around her, not just offering warmth but offering hope. And when he whispered, "Come home," he had been offering her everything. Shelter, safety, companionship, and eventually, love. She had taken that offer. She had been brave enough to accept help, to let someone else carry her when she could not walk on her own. And in doing so, she had saved herself just as surely as he had saved her. Together, they had built something remarkable, a marriage that lasted over 5 decades, a family that grew and flourished, a legacy of love that continued to inspire generations after they were gone. And that was the power of their story. It was not just about romance, though there was plenty of that. It was not just about overcoming grief, though that was part of it too. It was about the transformative power of love, about how one person's kindness could change the entire trajectory of a life. It was about choosing to live, even when living seemed impossible. It was about opening your heart to love again, even when you thought your heart was too broken to ever be whole. It was about building a future on the foundation of a difficult past, about honoring what was lost while embracing what could be found. The story of Eleanor Sterling and Caleb Xavier became more than just a family tale. It became a part of the folklore of Pleasant Valley, a story that people told when they needed hope, when they needed to be reminded that happiness could follow sorrow, that life could surprise you with second chances. Young women who had lost their husbands would hear the story and feel less alone. Men who had buried their wives would listen and believe that perhaps they too could find love again. Anyone who had faced loss or grief or heartbreak could take comfort in knowing that Eleanor and Caleb had faced those same things and had come through them to build a beautiful life. The old ranch became a symbol of hope, a physical reminder that love could triumph, that dedication and hard work could create something lasting. People would drive out just to see it, to stand on the porch where Eleanor and Caleb had spent so many evenings, to feel connected to a love story that had become legendary. And as the years continued to pass, as the world changed in ways that Eleanor and Caleb never could have imagined, their story remained constant. It remained relevant. Because love, real love, the kind that commits for the long haul, the kind that chooses partnership and kindness and dedication day after day, year after year, that kind of love never goes out of style. The graves under the cottonwood tree became a place of pilgrimage for some. Couples celebrating anniversaries would visit, holding hands and promising each other the same kind of enduring love. Those facing difficult times would come, seeking inspiration from two people who had faced their own difficulties and persevered. And always, when they left, they took something with them, a sense of possibility, a belief that love was worth pursuing, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. A reminder that even in our darkest moments, someone might come along and offer us their coat, whisper, "Come home," and change everything. That was the gift Eleanor and Caleb had given, not just to their family, but to everyone who heard their story. The gift of hope. The gift of believing in second chances. The gift of understanding that love could heal even the deepest wounds if we were brave enough to let it. And so the story lived on, passed down through generations, told and retold until it became timeless. A widow, frozen at a grave in December. A cowboy who wrapped his coat around her and whispered, "Come home." Two broken people who found each other and built a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. It was a story that would never grow old because it spoke to something fundamental in the human experience: the need to be loved, the need to belong, the need to find home in another person's arms. Eleanor and Caleb had found that with each other. And in finding it, they had shown countless others that it was possible, that no matter how dark the night, dawn would come, that no matter how cold the winter, spring would follow, that no matter how deep the grief, love could bloom again. Their story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to our capacity to heal and grow and love even after loss. It was a reminder that we were never too broken to be made whole, never too lost to be found, never too cold to be warmed by love's fire. And as the snow fell softly over the ranch on that December night, covering everything in peaceful white, two souls rested beneath the cottonwood tree, their love story complete, their legacy secure, their example eternal. The widow who had been frozen at the grave had found her home. The cowboy who offered his coat had found his purpose. And together they had created something beautiful that would never fade, never diminish, never be forgotten. "Come home," Caleb had whispered, and Eleanor had. And in coming home she had helped Caleb come home too, home to hope, home to joy, home to love, home to a life worth living together forever.